Another damning sexual abuse scandal for the Holy See, this time hanging over one of its most powerful figures. Cardinal Pell, the Vatican's top financial advisor, is returning to Australia to face multiple charges for historical sexual offences. Pell denies the allegations and says he's been the victim of a relentless character assassination.
I'm looking forward finally to having my day in court. I'm innocent of these charges. They are false. The whole idea of sexual abuse is abhorrent to me.
Cardinal Pell is the highest-ranked Vatican official to face such charges. For years, he's faced questions over his role in the Australian Church's staggering scale of sexual abuse. Between 1950 and 2015, 7% of Australian priests were accused of abusing more than 4,440 children. And he has in the past also been accused of knowing about and covering up widespread clergy abuse when he was Archbishop of Melbourne and later Sydney.
All along, I have been completely consistent and clear in my total rejection of these allegations.
When Pope Francis took office in 2013, he promised reforms to prevent these atrocities ever happening again, and to sack those found guilty of abuse or of covering it up.
Tradisce il corpo del Signore.
A priest who does this betrays the body of the Lord. A priest needs to lead children to sanctity, and children trust him. But instead of leading them to sanctity, he abuses them. I will make a comparison. It's like a satanic mass.
But critics such as Marie Collins, an Irish survivor of clergy sexual abuse, who quit Pope Francis's commission to protect children, says that so far there hasn't been an enormous amount of change, with many of his proposals running into a brick wall of Vatican opposition. Now, with one of his top advisors facing charges, Pope Francis's commitment to take action faces its biggest test. And so far, it seems the Vatican is standing by Pell.
The Holy See expresses its respect for the Australian justice system, which will have to decide the merits of the questions raised. At the same time, it is important to recall that Cardinal Pell has openly and repeatedly condemned as immoral and intolerable the acts of abuse committed against minors.
Is the Catholic Church committed to change and to doing enough to protect young people? Or do these charges underline the Pontiff's lack of true progress? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Chicago by Barbara Blaine. She's the founder of the Survivors Network for those abused by priests. In Rome, we have Vatican Affairs correspondent Gerard O'Connell. And from London, Keith Porteous-Wood, the Executive Director of the UK National Secular Society. Thanks all of you for joining us. Gerard O'Connell, if I can begin with you, sir. These are very strong charges against Cardinal Pell. Do you believe them?
Well, certainly there are very strong charges. We don't know exactly what the specific charges are. We know there are criminal charges relating to past historical abuse. The courts have not revealed yet what specific charges are. They're said there are many, and by many complainants. So I believe that perhaps tomorrow we will know what the specific charges are. There is much speculation in the press as to what those charges might be, but until we hear the specific ones, it is difficult to comment.
Okay, so let me reframe the question then. Reframe it and rephrase it. These are very disturbing allegations against the number 3 at the Vatican involving historic child sex abuse. Are you concerned about that? Do you believe it might be true?
Well, everybody is concerned about it here in the Vatican. I'm not a Vatican employee, I'm a journalist, but I understand, and I'm speaking to many people here, there is grave concern. The Victoria Police have decided to press charges. The magistrates will now hear the charges. Cardinal Pell will be back in Australia in the coming days to face the court. As I said earlier, I cannot speculate on what specific charges are, since not even in Australia do people know what those charges. There are many charges in the public media in past times, but nobody knows on which specific one of these the police have decided to press the charge.
Barbara Blaine, innocent until proven guilty, and Pell is confident he'll be let off. What do you think?
Well, I think that obviously, as Gerard said, we don't know what those charges actually are, and we really don't know the truth, and everyone should be considered innocent until proven guilty. However, I think that there is sufficient evidence that Cardinal Pell has been involved in a long history of covering up sexual abuse allegations, of not reporting allegations and alleged perpetrators to police, and in transferring those who have been validly accused. He's transferred them to new assignments where more allegations have arisen. Mm-hmm. And he has not accepted responsibility for that. And that in and of itself was already enough reason for him to have stepped down. In fact, it's even questionable why Pope Francis would have appointed him back in 2014 when there was such a cloud hanging over Cardinal Pell for his cover-up and his history in Australia.
Keith Porteous-Wood, is the church doing the right thing in standing by him because he is innocent until proven guilty, and they haven't come out and been outspoken and they haven't condemned him?
Yes, we should always presume innocence, but this is not the most important thing, as Barbara Blaine has just said. It's about the role of the Vatican overall, and particularly of the Pope. And the Pope, as she said, allowed him to be, picked him out of all of the people who could have done this job. He picked Pell with this terrible history, which has been confirmed by the Victorian Commission. And this also needs to be seen in the light of his recent appointment of the Archbishop to take over the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, who himself has got form on covering up child abuse. That needs to be added to his appointment of a commission, the Pope's Commission, with just 2 victims on it to look over these issues. They've departed in disgust. The Pope didn't need to appoint a commission to find out what to do about child abuse. The United Nations, I hold it here, the United Nations gave them 70 paragraphs of what to do. And what was the Vatican's attitude to that? A, not to accept them, and B, to attack the committee of experts from around the world. And that was disgraceful.
Okay, Gerard,
tells us everything we need to know about the. I've just finished. Tell us everything we need to know. Actions are stronger than words about what the Pope really thinks about child abuse and for justice for victims and for perpetrators.
Okay, undoubtedly. Now, Gerard, to the point that was made by the other 2 guests, they're talking about the fact that the man was appointed to the position when he was already under a cloud. Now, Pell was not only accused of molesting boys himself.
I think you have to actually...
Hold on. If I could just finish the question, please, sir. 20 seconds, right? So not only accused of molesting boys himself, but 2 of the Vatican's 9-member Council of Cardinals are alleged to have turned a blind eye, right, to child sex abuse undertaken by priests under their jurisdiction. So they shuffle them off to other places. And one of them was Cardinal Pell, the other Cardinal Javier Errázuriz, formerly the Archbishop of Santiago. So both put in the council by Pope Francis. So what the other 2 are saying is Pope Francis, even before these allegations now, Pope Francis knew there was a cloud hanging over not only Pell, but another cardinal as well, yet he still appointed them to the council. To them, it suggests that the Vatican doesn't take this seriously enough, and the Church is not doing enough to protect children. Would you accept that argument?
I think this is a false argument, because the Pope Francis was elected in March 2013. Within 6 days of his election, at the request of many cardinals, he created a council of cardinal advisors. He chose one from each continent. Cardinal Pell was the only one he could have chosen from Oceania and Australia.
So do you agree that he was tarnished, but the Pope had no choice?
At that time, if you will actually look back, the picture we have today was not the picture that was then there. Cardinal Pell has always been a controversial figure in Australia, but it was in that same year, 2013, that the Royal Commission started, and they actually have interviewed Cardinal Pell 3 times. The last one was in Rome in 2016, February. I was at that, I followed it. It is interesting that even though the Victoria Police investigated for 2 years, it took them 2 years to come to the conclusion that he could be charged. So with all this investigation, was the Pope expected to say that I will not appoint this man because I consider him guilty? We don't yet know if Cardinal Pell is guilty. There are lots of allegations, there are lots of stories. I followed them over several years, and the picture is not good. Nobody claims the picture is good. But when the Pope appointed Cardinal Pell, this picture was not as clear as we have it today. And as he said on the plane returning from Poland in July, he said there are doubts, and when there are doubts, the accused has to be given the advantage on the doubts.
Barbara, all things considered, in the year 2017, after everything you've heard, has the Church failed victims of sexual abuse, victims such as yourself?
Of course, there's no question that the Church has and continues to fail the victims, but that's not most important. What is most important is that the Church officials allow sexual perpetrators to remain in ministry today, and that children remain at risk today. And that is what is just horrific and has to be stopped. And for whatever reason, Pope Francis and Vatican officials seem to have blinders over their faces. They just refuse to see the obvious. And given the track record, why on earth would they even risk putting someone with a cloud behind him? Why would you put someone with a cloud over them into a position of high authority within the Church? It is time to open those files that the Vatican holds, turn them over to police from every nation, and join together with prosecutors. Let's prosecute the sexual perpetrators and put them in jail. Let's clean up the Church once and for all. Let's punish bishops who cover up and who enable and transfer perpetrators.
So let's get Gerard. Can you honestly disagree with any of that?
Barbara,
I think the Pope agrees with Barbara that if a person is clearly guilty, he should face the justice. The Pope has made very clear, as he said, returning from the flight from the Holy Land, there will be no daddy's boys in this pontificate.
Right. But
he said,
but Barbara is saying, why risk it?
If a person is guilty, he has to face the courts. But he must be, the Pope has also, in 2016, June, has introduced a legislation in the Church that if a bishop is is considered, judged to have neglected to protect children, or has been omitted in the protection of children, he can be removed from office. And the Pope has instructed 4 Vatican departments to follow up on any charges against this.
And those are the
Barbara knows that in the United States, in that same year, the 2 bishops in St. Paul, Minneapolis were removed, and also the bishop in Kansas City.
That is encouraging.
Other people have been
Certainly,
removed.
Gerard.
The problem with the
Gerard, if I
Vatican
could come
is
in.
they do not make public much of this.
Certainly. Gerard, if I could come in, because, and this is what the others are saying, there are some encouraging moves, but they feel it's not enough, especially since in the year 2017, under Pope Francis, when everybody thought the church was moving in a positive direction, you still have these horrendous allegations that are resurfacing. Let me bring in Keith Porteous.
Imran.
Keith, come in. You want to talk?
Imran, the two points that Barbara made were in this report from the UN about making all these secret archives available to prosecuting authorities, to removing from office people who've been accused and suspending them. The Pope also had a tribunal for bishops, and it's never met, and it was just a way of avoiding them going to being sent to criminal secular authorities. That's where they should all be going. And an important point that I've found from every lawyer I've spoken to who's dealing with these issues of those abused by the Catholic Church, in every case, they are saying that the Church plays hardball against people they know perfectly well have been abused and refuse to give them compensation and compound the abuse they've already settled. And those instructions must be coming from the top.
I think this is disproved in the United States. If you check in the United States,
no,
how
that's
much
truly
money has
not
gone to the
true. In
victims?
the United States, that's not true. No, that's not true. When those bishops stepped down,
what's
actually,
not true, Barbara? What's not true?
The issues of the sexual abuse, what's not true is that those bishops who stepped down did so because of allegations of sexual abuse. They stepped down for other reasons, and one of them, the one from Kansas City, even was permitted 2 months later to ordain the next class of new priests who had to pledge their allegiance and obedience to the very bishop who had stepped down. And he was permitted to step down. He wasn't removed, and he wasn't really punished, and either were those bishops in the Twin Cities. And so it's simply not true to portray that as some type of punishment and hold out hope that means that bishops somehow are being punished, because the bare minimum has happened to those bishops here in the U.S., and that was only after a long period of time.
And the Church in the States has openly campaigned to stop the relaxation of the statute of limitations on child abuse, to make it more difficult for these charges, both criminally and civilly, to be brought. Mm-hmm. They've had the gall to do that openly and actually campaign and pay people to campaign in legislatures. Right. And I think that's one of the most disgraceful things I've ever seen.
Okay, I want to bring this almost back to the beginning here, because
within
invariably
the church law, that limitation is no longer existing.
Okay, Gerard, if you'd allow me to bring this back to the beginning.
Yes.
Right, so we start out with Cardinal Pell. Invariably, when a cardinal is under scrutiny, if a cardinal's on trial, the church is on trial. And you know, this becomes a very big discussion. I want to kind of bring it back to Cardinal Pell now and ask you, Barbara, if you're aware of what Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York said about Cardinal Pell. He was interviewed very recently. He said, "I don't want to believe the charges against Pell, and Pell's willingness to cooperate with the judicial process and acknowledge he's not above the law only shows the mettle of a great man." He also said, "I appreciate him, I admire him, and I want to stick with him." And my emphasis on the Cardinal saying, "I want to stick with him." What do you think of that, Barbara?
I think that Cardinal Dolan himself has a huge history of cover-up and of knowingly transferring perpetrator priests. And it started way back decades ago when he was the bishop over in St. Louis. Then he went to Milwaukee, where he had a horrific tenure for the victims and assisted in ensuring that victims in Wisconsin, the state, would never see justice. And then he went on to New York, where he continues in supporting those who have been accused. And so it seems like the pot, you know, like the fire calling the pot black. It seems crazy for to look at Cardinal Dolan as someone who we should believe when he has the cloud hanging over himself.
Right. Gerard O'Connell, very finally, please, sir, right? I mean, I know, and especially in the context of this debate, you've been, on the defensive here because the other two are on the other side in many ways in this debate. I want to ask you, you're in the Vatican, you're in the Vatican City. You're a journalist, yes, you don't represent the Vatican, but if the Pope had to call you in and say, we have a mess on our hands, how can we fix this? How can we make this better? What would you advise him to do, sir?
Well, I think the Pope has set out the path that should be followed. That, first of all, any allegation must be investigated immediately because we have to believe children. This has not happened in the past. The Church admits now that in the past they did not believe, they did not listen to children.
And you can all agree on that, right? You can all agree on that you have to believe children first. Yes?
Of course.
Then
yes,
secondly,
but the
I think
himself
that there is no... Why do you say that?
His actions do not equal his words.
This is really a misconception. Because he has, since he has become Pope, he has, first of all, changed the law in terms of negligent bishops. Secondly, he has set up a commission to protect children, to advise him, but also to go to the bishops' conferences around the world to advise them and ensure that they have structures in place which will safeguard children. Thirdly, he has prosecuted, brought to the Vatican, and the nuncio from the Dominican Republic in 2016 and put him in jail and put him on trial. Fourthly, he has made very clear that if you're a cardinal, if you're a bishop, you will still be committed, you still have to face justice. And fifthly, there are actually two tribunals in the Vatican. There is the tribunal that hears the first case, and then there is the second tribunal, which is an appeals tribunal. And in terms of bishops, the Pope is the one who takes the final decision. And he has made this very clear that he will not tolerate the abuse of children.
Okay. Okay. Gerard, Barbara, and Keith, I wish we could go on with this discussion because it's been really good talking to all of you. Unfortunately, I've got to move on. I thank you all for your time.